Well, that was a weekend full of lots of highs and lows. Let's talk about it all at once.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Locked On UCLA podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for making this show your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for your support. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can score and start the season off the big return on FanDuel. New customers, you place your first $5 bet, and you can get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, a long, crazy weekend. A lot of it having to do with USC or fake USCs or SCs, whatever you want to call the University of Southern Cal and the University of South Carolina. All of them intertwined into a big UCLA, SC, USC, whatever it is, weekend. We'll start the lows because, I'm a bad news bear first. All right, so here we go. One of the moments that defined the majority of the week, defined the majority of the weekend, was a UCLA-USC moment we're talking about on the gridiron in the Rose Bowl, a place where UCLA has not beaten SC at home since 2018, the first year in Chip Kelly's tenure. So despite the likes of Deshaun Foster already guaranteeing himself more wins than Chip Kelly in the first year, you could argue against a much tougher schedule too, then here he is with an opportunity to make that statement at home in a very winnable game where SC's coming off a big flu. They don't know how to win one-score games, keep late leads. And it was UCLA who early on got that first big kick from Ateen Bagani. SC tied it. The Bruins defense would falter a little bit, held them, but then a lot of emotions boiled over heading into the locker room. And we would know a lot about Deshaun Foster's program with how UCLA came out of the locker room in the third. Well, they came out and passed the test with flying colors, having to kick off from their own 5-yard line. UCLA came out and punched USC in the mouth, considering they had 2 or 3 drives in that third quarter, fourth quarter alone that started inside the UCLA 50 or right on top of it or right next to it, basically, in this game. And the Bruins held their own with spectacular plays again and again made by J. Michael Sturdivant. They found something with the run game with Harden nearing 100 yards individually, and then Ethan Garbers was pretty spectacular, right? The one thing in this game as a UCLA Bruin for the offensive side, when you only score 13 points against USC's defense, and I know a lot's been made about the physicality and the revamped defense under D'Anton Lynn. Okay, that's cool, but UCLA didn't turn over the ball. One of the worst rushing offenses in the country, in the Big Ten, dead last. They ran for over 100 yards, and they nearly had a 100-yard rusher for TJ Harden. Ethan Garbers had like a 12-for-12 streak or something ridiculous completing passes, 265 yards, a touchdown pass, 0 turnovers for the offense. UCLA's best receiver made spectacular catch after spectacular catch, including averaging over 23 yards per catch. Basically, a quarter of the field, he was making great catches, like great in-traffic catches, turning his body, just making some of the USC defenders look silly by burning him and making great on-ball plays, high-pointing, diving, everything to cradle the ball in his body and come down with it. That was the J. Michael Sturdivant we've been wanting to see unleashed since he came from Cal to UCLA. And TJ Harden, just like last year, nearly put up a 100 yards on the ground. And next thing you know, the Bruins had everything going for them. So imagine the disappointment when you sit there in a home game, you have the lead, and again, UCLA couldn't score in the red zone. It's the sloppiness in the moments of truth that has hurt this UCLA team. They were able to get over it in that 3-game winning streak, but it came back to bite them in Washington, and it reared its ugly head again in the USC game. So as much as the optics, everything was done mostly right for UCLA. In terms of the majority of the game, UCLA played arguably, you would think offensively. If you take away the points from the scoreboard, you take away, all right, the optics of the 13 points, they played a pretty complete game offensively. They got their best weapon. They were finding Maliki Matzav on an ice screen that got a touchdown. They did just about everything right, other than punch in and just turn this game upside down when they had the chance to after J. Michael Sturdivant made a spectacular diving catch at the 5. You would think all these numbers would at least get UCLA over 20 points, at least a B rating, B+, a very solid B. And then they couldn't do anything in the 4th. And when they needed a 4th and short, it was a terrible call on the QB sneak. I think it was Colt McCoy in the call saying, yeah, that was a little rough on that decision to run the ball like that in that situation when UCLA went forward on their own half of the field after USC was able to take the lead late in the game on a touchdown throw with about 6 minutes left. It didn't seal the game with UCLA failing, but they had that momentum where they could have struck right back, scored a touchdown, put all the pressure back on USC. At least something to get into field goal range and tie it and do something like that. But the Bruins didn't. It was nearly a good performance by Eric Bieniemy with how they came out of the locker room. Instead, the frustration lingers. You would think with this 13 points, it's a D performance. It's an up and down performance offensively for this UCLA team because the stupid things came in the form of disciplinary things. They just couldn't get out of their own way when a false start and 1st and goal, protecting Garbers in the moment of truth, the runs for loss, all those things coming back to hurt UCLA because USC had 3 sacks and 3 tackles for loss. All right, just a couple plays where Garbers was running out of the pocket, getting blitzed, couldn't get out. The Bruins then all of a sudden countered in the second half with great adjustments, multiple screen plays that were well-designed, well-disguised, and perfectly executed until the Bruins couldn't do anything those final 2 drives. UCLA gets a C+, and if they had cashed in on a couple more points, if they could have driven a little further, right, then in this game, UCLA could have had 23-ish points, and that would have gotten them a B. And that would have certainly won them this game. They didn't need their best effort in this game to win it. But the Bruins, unfortunately, played decent for the majority. They didn't make many mistakes. And I just wonder how much of it was a discipline thing and how much of it came down to coaching in this loss. So a C offensively. Defensively, Ikaka Malloy, that defense played their hearts out. As great as can be. 6 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 1 from Femli Oladejo. KJ Wallace, think about him coming off as a DB, 3.5 tackles for loss. You don't see that every day. 3.5 tackles for loss in an individual game with a pass defended for KJ Wallace. And I'm pretty sure he also got hurt a little bit too at one point in the game. So KJ Wallace played his hearts out. You had Schlesinger, who's battling for the Dick Butkus Award. Femli Oladejo, who is coming into his own off the edge. Wallace, who played his heart out. But the one thing UCLA needed was maybe force a turnover in this game. It's a little tough to do when the windows were tighter, when their back's against the wall. Multiple times in the second half, USC had to only go 20 yards to get a single chance at a field goal, and they didn't. Early in the first half, USC would drive down, and the Bruins just bunkered down. They said, all right, we're going to hunker down, not going to allow anything. Bend, but don't break. And the Bruins did not break defensively other than when USC's touchdown drive. Let's pull this up. That last touchdown drive for USC was a total of 49 yards. 49 yards. 3 plays. A double pass. All right? How much can I fault the defense for losing on a double pass, losing contain on one, but giving up a 49-yard touchdown drive when USC's, this was what USC had, a 4-play, 7-yard drive that ended at the UCLA 40. You had USC with a 5-play, 15-yard drive, another 7-play, lost 5 yards. And then finally, when UCLA could not save themselves with special teams, it was 1 drive too short, and SC made them pay. I think the defense deserves A- to A efforts, despite the heartbreaking loss. Because some of these guys played their absolute hearts out. And Ikaika Malloy, in kind of a, hey, I know D'Anton Lynn spurned UCLA, but the Bruins still have a defensive coordinator that deserves a lot of props, a raise to make sure he stays, and hopefully can do an excellent job recruiting to replace some of these guys that are also going to leave. Because this is a defense that has been just as physical, just as good against the run, despite losing all the pass rushing ability of last year, losing two guys literally starting for USC on the other sideline in the secondary. And the Bruins are able to make do with some late transfer portal gets, the leftover remains of a linebacking core that has blossomed, changing guys into different positions, the lack of recruiting ability from Chip Kelly, and Micah Malloy did a great job. And I hope he gets an absolute raise. Because if you held USC to 19 points against what's supposed to be an offensive genius and mastermind in Lincoln Riley, and all you had to do was go in short fields in that second half, and the Bruins only allowed 10 points all in the fourth quarter, but they went for their own 30. Of course, they're going to give up points there. The special teams failed UCLA in this game. It was frustrating. It was frustrating to see that they tried to do the one thing, and then came Medrano's fingertips just out of the reach of that last touchdown pass. Heartbreak. So the defense, very close to an A effort. First half, a little rough with SC driving, but they did not break. And even though they gave the touchdown drive, they did not either. Special teams is where killed this UCLA team, specifically punting. I don't want to pin this all on one man because it's not. But in the end, Brody Richter had 3 punts, 106 yards, 35 yards. And he did put 2 inside the 20 with the long of a 54-yarder. But it was his second straight week with a shanked punt that hurt UCLA. All right, a second straight week that put them against the 8 ball. And then what do you have? You had USC, who's got the Ray Guy Award winner, who had 3 punts, almost all of 50 yards, and dropped 3 inside the 20. That was the difference in this game. UCLA's special teams, just because of that, has to get at least a D. The difference between the Ray Guy Award-winning player potentially in the country between what was a guy who was really red hot punting the football earlier in this season and was putting UCLA in good spots defensively, and the defense just couldn't off the field. Now the reverse happened in the USC game where UCLA's defense, not all because of Richter, but in various situations or not, got put in some terrible defensive situations and got themselves off the field more often than not until the very end. So special teams ends up getting a D. Offensively, a lot of optics. They pass, but they failed again. I know you're going to disagree with me, but they did a lot of things right offensively, including some adjustments. It was the moments of truth that cost UCLA this game. When you're not a good football team, neither one of these teams are good football teams, and it was a close game, bitter rivalry. It's the moments of truth and the discipline that define the games. And where did UCLA lose themselves? In the discipline and the moment of truth. The 3 moments of truth when it came down to execution of a trick play, UCLA not executing on a 4th down, and in the end, the Bruins couldn't keep SC off the field and out of the end zone every single time. And that's what led to this heartbreaking finish, which keeps the Bruins out of a bowl. I was looking to see if UCLA could win that last game against Fresno State to get to 5 wins, if their APR scores would be high enough, and I just don't think they will be. There's too many teams who are banking on the door, who are about to walk in the door of a 6-win opportunity. So I think all the bowls will be filled anyways. But beyond that, I do think UCLA, if there was not enough spots and they needed 5 and 7 teams, I don't think UCLA's APR scores, if I was reading that right, they had a list. I was looking at CBS Sports with this teams with 5 wins and APR scores. I think UCLA would be in 5th behind the Cincinnatis of the world and so on and so forth. Frustrating it is, but it's not as great, though, because UCLA women's basketball is the number 1 team in the lands after their first ever win over a number 1 ranked program in program history. Let's talk about that next. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's number 1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers, you bet $5 and you can get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. You can hunch in the middle of the game. You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Hey, I think the ways, betting on UCLA football has been hard this year, but maybe you're going to try and get into the world of basketball. That, maybe you're going to get stuck with the bad beat segment, if you know what that's been talked about with Scott Van Pelt and everything. But hey, basketball, it's going to be an interesting one. UCLA's got still a couple more beatdowns to give for the men's side, and the women, they're the number one team in the land. Go check it out with FanDuel and probably put all your money, in good spots. Because if you win that first $5 bet, you can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, here we go. Let's talk about this, right? UCLA women's basketball. They've been searching for a program-defining moment in the NCAA era. All right, so UCLA has had the highest of highs in women's basketball. They just haven't done it since it's become an NCAA sanctioned sport. So in that history, UCLA does not have a national championship. They don't even have a Final Four appearance. And now that the spotlight is kind of shifting a lot towards women's basketball, that's why you're starting to see a lot of these, big time games get sellouts instead of in empty arenas. And now all the spotlight, some national attention will be shed towards UCLA's way, because they are the cream of the crop in the Big Ten. It's them and USC, who UCLA leapfrogged, and then UConn, and Notre Dame, who stayed behind UCLA. Because Corey closed his team as number one in the country for beating down South Carolina. I know I reacted to the game afterwards, but man, how far have they come in the last 2 seasons when South Carolina was led? And you have to know what Corey Close was probably thinking in the back of her brain, right? You had a South Carolina team that I believe beat UCLA twice in one season, once in Columbia where the Bruins had them on the ropes, and then lost in the Sweet 16. That was the Aaliyah Boston-led team that was on their way potentially to a dominant, undefeated run before falling to Caitlin Clark in the Final Four. Then it was Cardoso who came in and was the superstar and led South Carolina to an undefeated, dominant side. And I think I was seeing this. South Carolina doesn't get beat down by 15 to 10 points, 15 to 20 points. They haven't lost by like that since to Baylor in the NCAA tournament when Baylor won the national championship. So when teams beat teams that good, right? Obviously, each team is switching, and more so now. But when you have elite coaches with elite talent that are almost always going to be in the top 10, top 5, like Dawn Staley is and has been and will be until she decides she wants to retire or take on a different challenge. That's how good South Carolina is going to be every year. And maybe they don't look like a title favorite this year. Maybe they're a top 10 team versus the number 1 team at this very juncture. But when you beat somebody that good with a lot of expectations in front of a national audience, especially on the women's basketball side this early, that means you are the team to beat. A team that had 43 straight wins. Various leaders in that locker room have come and gone since then for South Carolina. But the teams that have beaten them have been nobody last year, one of the greatest players of all time in Caitlin Clark, and South Carolina has gone and beaten UConn in a national championship a few seasons ago. They've won, 2 of the last 3? And women's basketball has been run by the SEC these last 3 seasons, right? I believe South Carolina, LSU, back to South Carolina. And the Bruins have run into those 2 teams the last couple of years. Last year against LSU in the Sweet 16, South Carolina in the year before. So the youth that has come in and is now in their 3rd year, they've learned, they've grown. The Bruins have stacked the talent in the portal. From the class of 22 that is heading into their 3rd season, I believe they now are as good as it gets when you get the top 3 recruits in one class and they've all come in via the portal or initial recruiting, and after 2 years in the portal, the Bruins have gotten that. Players who are juniors, from bench players to starters, and then you get a Gardner in the portal, right? You bring in a superstar like Alina Hornisalo, who has come in, and because Kiki Rice wasn't ready to go initially, got valuable minutes early on in her career against a top 15 team at the time in Louisville across the country in a neutral site game, and being like, hey, this is our chance. If we lose this game, we're not going to be number 1, even though we're good enough to be. And she held on to the challenge as UCLA eventually pulled away from the Cardinals. withstood a strong challenge at home with a lot of their players missing due to injury or just travel fatigue when they had to come back from Paris, France. They withstood that battle, and now they have the dominant force in the post. They won the elite point guards. They won the great freshman point guards. I think they still have one of the best injured players who has not appeared in a game in Charlize Ledger-Walker. They have 2 3-point snipers and multiple ball handlers who can all do different things with various options to get into the paints. Lauren Betts is the most dynamite, important piece to this UCLA team in the post. But they don't run the same without Kiki Rice, and that was shown in that South Carolina game. When she returned and played 28 minutes, close to it, even though it wasn't maybe the most dominant stat line, when she got red hot in the game in the middle quarters, it was a clutch bucket or a layup that went and one and would just finish in the paint on the run. And that's not something UCLA necessarily had in those first few games when they weren't playing the elite opponents like South Carolina. You can go out and run, you got to get those buckets. You're not always going to be able to score a lot of points. It will generally be a little low scoring like it was the second or third times when UCLA played USC, the Trojans, last season in the game at Galen Center and the game in the Pac-12 tournament semifinal. This win not only cements UCLA's status as a 1 seed for a very long time, they are the best team ever in this current stage, right? They are the team to beat, first ever win in a program that had never won against the number 1 ranked team, and now they are the number 1 ranked team. You've got UConn clawing at them, but UCLA hasn't played UConn, and they won't this year. As fun as it would have been to see Paige Beckers for the second straight year. Now the Bruins, they sit and they wait. They do have some fun non-conference games on neutral sites coming up. They have an East Coast one, I think, on MLK Day. They have one coming up against Creighton. But it really is a sit-and-wait game for the Bruins until Big Ten time comes. A lot of these arenas, I think, will be ready to see the Bruins come, right? Both the men and the women are going to get a lot of angsty road support from these crazy rabid Big Ten fans that we're going to see in these arenas in early January, February, March. I just wonder how they're going to handle it. But this is a team with this win cements themselves as a dominant 1 seed potential. That is the best win right now, right? That was one of the best wins so far in the country. And that's going to hold weight for a very long time. I hope South Carolina keeps winning and dominating, because they did show some cracks in the armor heading into that UCLA game. And when you came into a sellout crowd, a team that was ready and had that game circled, and they came out to play. Because UCLA hasn't come up and shown out in big-time games. They just have not. Not under Corey Close. They have not been able – remember, a few years ago, they were sitting in the WNIT. So then battling back into the tournament, back-to-back Sweet 16s, where UCLA, I think, was good enough and better than just how they finished these last 2 seasons, especially last season. This is the year to prove to everybody they are the team to be reckoned with. And I hope they continue to prove that as the season goes on. Congrats. They are the number 1 team in the land. Now let's recap a crazy college football Saturday one more time. In the Big Ten, what does it look like across the country? So many crazy scenarios. Let's talk about that next on Locked On UCLA. Let's talk about game time picks, all right? Because I'm sitting there. I'm out of town at the moment, right? Visiting family on the East Coast. I'm like, I got a lot of games I want to go check out. Well, I've already been able to use GameTime, and they got me a zone deal to go check out a game, right? It was the NBA Cup. They got that big-time tournament going on. I was like, you know what? Hey, I went with my cousin. We went to go watch the Nets play the Hornets, and it was an epic game that finished 116-115. It was awesome. And where'd I go? GameTime. That got me the best deal, a zone deal. I like to check and see what the prices look like after I get tickets. No, that was the lowest price ticket, and I got the best price ticket with some solid seats, all right? And that's how I rolled to enjoy one of my first NBA games on the East Coast. With GameTime and zone deals, that tells you with the price toggled on, the all-in pricing. Yeah, that feature toggled in. You know where you're sitting. You know where you're going. And you can get some of the best deals out there for getting tickets. GameTime's helped me multiple times, and it will with you. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime Picks Download the app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, use the code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Locked On College. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Well, in one of the wilder, crazy college football days in memory, in lots of games that define the day, unfortunately for us as UCLA fans, we had to wait a very long time for us to sit there and wait. But, it still is close. Some of these games are pretty wild. But let's go through the Big Ten before we kind of expand a little deeper. All right, you had Purdue versus Michigan State. I remember the Locked On Big Ten squad, they were joke about, hey, who's going to get that first Big Ten win? Is it going to be Purdue? Is it going to be UCLA? We're going to choose Purdue. Jokes on them. Purdue's 1-10. They're 0-8. They are on the verge of losing all their Big Ten games. So that's not where UCLA is going to sit. Okay? That's not where UCLA is going to sit because Michigan State beats Purdue and they go to 24-17. Puts the Spartans on that verge of postseason eligibility for a bowl by barely beating Purdue and not scoring a single touchdown after the break, being up 24-3, but they eked it out and they won it. And Jonathan Smith has done a fine job in what was a terrible situation to take over for, brought in some talent, brought in some new culture, and they're on the verge of getting to a bowl. So I wonder what the Big Ten next year is going to look like. More on that in a moment. You've got Indiana, Ohio State. When you had the college game day, you had all these big time pre-game shows there because it was the game of the day. It was the defined moment to see if Indiana was legit at Ohio State playing the horseshoe. And unfortunately, after watching this game, I thought, man, this day is going to suck in college football, right? It was number 2, number 5. Ohio State won 38-15. Indiana, though, came out 7 points. Like, that's the Indiana we saw at the Rose Bowl earlier this year. Then Ohio State scored a touchdown. Indiana, speak about a punt problem, dropped the ball, led to another Ohio State touchdown. Ohio State comes out, gets an early lead, and just pounded an Indiana team that had not known what it was like to trail in the second half all season until their 11th game of the year. But because of all the chaos, of all the craziness in college football on Saturday, Indiana not only probably didn't drop out of the top 10, top 15, depending on what the CFP rankings correlate with the AP top 25 and everything else, Indiana is still in the running of a CFP berth, a surprising CFP berth. And that's what it shows you with how the new coaching, a new mantra, a disciplined, respectful, and revered football coach can do with a little cockiness, a lot of confidence, and with the destruction he could do on his way to getting to 10 wins before finally seeing his first loss. Indiana, if they beat one of the worst teams in the country, they can be 11-1 in the regular season and make it to a CFP. It wasn't that hard. It wasn't that hard, and they had a schedule primed to do it. College football is going to be defined for now in the 12-team playoff era until something changes, which could be very soon, by schedule breaks and taking advantage of your opportunity. And Indiana has done that to this point. And then the craziness broke out. Let's get into it. All right, you had Penn State, Minnesota. Minnesota was leading early. They led often. And then all of a sudden, Penn State won 26-25, eking out of Minneapolis with a win, keeping Minnesota at 6-5 as opposed to getting them to 7-4 with their run they've been on the rest of the season. Penn State almost fell to the bugaboo. That was one of many close games against CFP contenders, top 25 teams. And they eked out a win, 26-25. Just shows you how close UCLA was to getting to a bowl game this year if they could have beaten Minnesota. And how good Minnesota is. Man, oh man. Frustrating. Then you had Illinois-Rutgers, a Rutgers team that is already bowl eligible, had a ranked Illinois team on the ropes until a missed field goal, I think, negated from a timeout, and then Illinois completes a ridiculous 4th and long pass that turns into a touchdown with 4 seconds remaining as Luke Altmaier threw his second touchdown pass. And Illinois escapes 38-31 when they were trailing 31-30, out of field goal range, but too close to really do anything else. and got a pass that would have set them up and instead turns into a touchdown in a shocking turn of events. That's how crazy the middle to the bottom portion of the Big Ten is. That's how competitive the Big Ten is in general. That UCLA went, beat down Rutgers, that was down on their luck, who was on the verge of beating a top 25 Illinois team. Frustrating. Then you've got Iowa and Maryland. And Iowa went down to Maryland, beat them. The more Iowa wins, a 7-4 record, 5-3 in the Big Ten. Iowa probably stands, and I think will be the signature win for Deshaun Foster in his first year. All right. Hawaii, that was, the disappointing, but they came back and won early. Rutgers was a very strong start to the big winning streak. Nebraska is always fun. But Iowa, with that 7-4 record, if they can get to 8-4, maybe 9-4, they were 5-3 in Big Ten play currently after beating Maryland. That looks pretty good for UCLA's resume as a big win to send those Hawkeye fans home disappointing. And with Maryland losing, they fall to 4-7, 1-7 in Big Ten play, and that also means with that loss, they will have less wins than UCLA in the Big Ten. Of course, they only beat USC, which is always good. Thank you, Terrapins. But that means that Maryland will be below them. Looking across the rest of this Big Ten slate, you had Michigan absolutely destroying Northwestern, 50-6. Got them bowl eligible in a year where they couldn't throw the ball whatsoever. Although against Northwestern, Michigan threw it 35 times, only to get 195 yards. I'm not sure how that's possible. They did it. They only ran for their main running back, only ran for 92 yards, but they beat a Northwestern team that I think UCLA would beat pretty easily. But that, until we get that game, we won't know. Michigan destroyed them. Means Northwestern, best case scenario, could only tie UCLA in the Big Ten standings. Then you've got Maryland, you got Nebraska and Wisconsin. UCLA obviously beat Nebraska. Nebraska put up 44 points on Wisconsin. 44. A Wisconsin team that's still in potential for a Big Ten bowl berth. And Nebraska, 44-25. 44-25. Dominated. Raiola play a lot better. 28 for 38, 293 yards. Passing, they ran for 113 yards. A lot of points early. And then Wisconsin, 3-5 in Big Ten play. Nebraska, all 3-5 in Big Ten play. So now with the Bruins sitting here with their Big Ten schedule done, they finished 3-6 since they play Fresno State to end the season. UCLA is currently, ironically, in 15th place, right? That was their preseason prediction. So UCLA is ahead of Purdue, 18th, Maryland, 17th, 16th is Northwestern. UCLA is in 15th place, which is where they were preseason predicted to be. Now, if we go back and take a look at the schedules, because there's a lot of teams that are just a half game ahead of UCLA, just a half game. Here are some teams and some games that are of note for UCLA to already surpass some preseason expectations, which I think they did. Okay, Friday night, you've got Minnesota taking on Wisconsin. If Minnesota goes to Camp Randall, actually Friday morning in the West Coast, goes to Camp Randall and beats Wisconsin on Black Friday, that means Wisconsin would tie UCLA in the standings. If Iowa can beat Nebraska in a nice primetime game at Kinnick Stadium, that would mean UCLA would tie with Nebraska. You catch my drift. We can keep going. Then you've got the likes of Michigan State, Rutgers. They're both 6-5, 5-6, 3-5 in the Big Ten. Each one of those two teams, they play in the middle of the day Saturday. One of those teams is going to lose, which means they'll tie UCLA in the standings. So there's one team that is definitely going to lose. Northwestern, if they upset Illinois in the battle of the state of Illinois, could tie UCLA in the standings, but they won't leapfrog them. So best case scenario, despite all the frustration, despite everything Deshaun Foster's gone through, UCLA is going to beat the preseason expectations of them being in 15th place. It might not be by much, but with what they had to deal with, and despite every chance they did, they make lives hard for themselves. UCLA is going to beat it. And they can beat it by a few. They can be closer to 10th place, or they can leapfrog it by one at the very worst. But nobody was expecting UCLA to go beat Iowa, go beat a Rutgers team that started 4-0, or go into Nebraska and win. So despite all the challenges, remember, UCLA, Indiana, Penn State, Oregon. That was half of their Big Ten schedule, was 3 teams in the top 10. That's not what many teams can say. So we got to be proud of our UCLA Bruins and give them support as they prepare to take on Fresno State this week and end that pesky losing streak to those damn Bulldogs. All right? Next episode, we're going to talk about recruiting. UCLA's got a couple of commits over the weekend, a transfer portal commit already, and they've got a commit for next year's class. Hands up, 8 clap time, baby. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, UCLA. UCLA fights. So stay here for Locked On UCLA. Like, comment, subscribe. We're talking UCLA recruiting next. This has been Locked On UCLA. Zach signing off. Go Bruins.